The summer heat hung thick over Atlanta's Civic Center on that June evening in 1973, the kind of humidity that made the air shimmer above the asphalt and left concertgoers fanning themselves with their programs before the doors even opened. Inside the venue, the backstage area buzzed with controlled chaos as stagehands rushed to set up equipment, sound engineers tested microphones, and performers prepared for what promised to be the most significant soul music festival the city had seen in years. Marcus Williams stood in the narrow corridor leading to the stage entrance, his guitar case clutched tightly in his sweating palms, trying to steady his breathing as he watched roadies wheel massive amplifiers past him. At 23 years old, this was his moment, the opportunity he had been working toward since he first heard "Papa's Got a Brand New Bag" crackling through his grandmother's radio when he was just 8 years old. Marcus had grown up in the sweet Auburn neighborhood, where music poured from every doorway and window on Saturday nights, where church choirs on Sunday mornings could make even the most hardened souls stop and listen. His mother worked double shifts at Grady Memorial Hospital, and his father had left when Marcus was too young to remember his face, but music had filled those empty spaces in ways that nothing else could. He learned guitar from Mr. Jefferson, the elderly man who ran the corner store and kept an old Gibson in the back room, and he spent countless afternoons studying album covers, memorizing liner notes, and watching every televised performance he could find. James Brown became more than an idol to Marcus. He was a blueprint, a proof that a young black man from the South could command stages, create something entirely new, and change the world through rhythm and soul. The way James Brown moved, the way he controlled a band with a single gesture, the way he could make 10,000 people move as one body, it was magic, and Marcus wanted desperately to understand that magic, to channel even a fraction of it through his own performances. The call had come 3 weeks earlier, delivered by a promoter named Raymond, who had seen Marcus perform at a small club on Auburn Avenue. "We need an opening act," Raymond had said, his voice excited over the crackling phone line. 15 minutes, maybe 20. You'll go on before the meters, way before the headliner." Marcus hadn't needed to ask who the headliner was. Everyone in Atlanta knew that James Brown was coming home, that the godfather of soul himself was performing at the Civic Center as part of a summer tour that had already become legendary. Marcus had said yes before Raymond finished explaining the details, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. For 3 weeks, he had rehearsed until his fingers bled, practiced his stage moves in the cramped living room of his apartment, and studied every James Brown performance he could recall, watching how the master commanded space, how he used silence as powerfully as sound, how every spin and every slide across the stage was calculated for maximum impact. Now standing backstage with 20 minutes until he was supposed to walk into the lights, Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could hear the crowd beginning to fill the venue, their voices creating a rumble that vibrated through the concrete floor beneath his feet. Other performers milled around, a horn section comparing notes on their charts, backup singers practicing harmonies in a corner, a drummer stretching his wrists and rolling his shoulders. Marcus recognized some of them from the local scene, musicians who had been grinding in clubs and small venues just like him, all of them brought together for this one night to celebrate the music that had shaped their lives. He adjusted his shirt, a burnt orange button-down that he had ironed 3 times that morning, and checked his reflection in a dusty mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. His hair was picked out into a perfect afro, his boots were polished, and his guitar was in tune. He was as ready as he would ever be. 5 minutes for Marcus Williams, a stagehand called out, clipboard in hand, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to center himself the way his grandmother had taught him before church solos when he was a child. He thought about all the hours of practice, all the dreams he had carried since childhood, all the people back in sweet Auburn who had believed in him when he barely believed in himself. This was more than just a performance. It was a statement, a declaration that he belonged on stages like this, that his music mattered. As he walked toward the stage entrance, guitar in hand, he passed by a group of men in sharp suits and sunglasses, and his breath caught when he realized he was looking at James Brown's band, the legendary JBs, the tightest rhythm section in the world. They barely glanced at him as they discussed their set list, their casual confidence both intimidating and inspiring. Marcus stepped up to the edge of the stage, hidden behind the heavy velvet curtains, and peered out at the crowd. The Civic Center was nearly full, thousands of people finding their seats, laughing, talking, creating an energy that felt like electricity in the air. The house lights were still up, bathing everything in a warm glow. And Marcus could see faces of all ages. Young couples on dates, families who had dressed up for the occasion, older folks who remembered when James Brown first started making waves, teenagers who had grown up on his recent hits. This was his audience, his people, and he was about to step out and try to give them something worth remembering. The stage manager appeared at his elbow, headset wrapped around his neck, and gave Marcus a nod. "You're up," he said simply, and then the house lights began to dim. The crowd's chatter shifted to excited murmurs, then to applause as the stage lights came up, washing the platform in blues and purples. Marcus walked out, his band, 3 musicians he had been playing with for the past 2 years, following behind him. The applause was polite but measured. The audience didn't know him yet, hadn't decided if he was worth their full attention or just someone to endure before the real show started. Marcus plugged in his guitar, the familiar weight of it settling against his body like an old friend, and nodded to his drummer, Kenny, who counted them off with a sharp tap of his sticks. The first notes rang out, a funky groove that Marcus had written specifically for this moment, influenced by everything he loved about soul and funk, but trying desperately to find his own voice within it. As he began to play, Marcus felt the nervousness start to melt away, replaced by the pure focus that always came when he was lost in music. His fingers moved across the fretboard with practiced precision, pulling out riffs that made the crowd start to nod their heads, and when he stepped up to the microphone to sing, his voice came out stronger than he had hoped, clear and confident. The song built momentum, the bass player locking in with the drums to create a pocket that you could fall into, and Marcus saw people in the front rows beginning to move, swaying to the rhythm, giving him their attention. This was working. He was connecting. For a brief, shining moment, Marcus allowed himself to believe that he belonged here, that he was more than just a warm-up act, that he was a real performer, worthy of this stage. Midway through the second song, something shifted inside Marcus. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Maybe it was the emotion of the moment. Or maybe it was simply that he had spent so many years studying James Brown that the movements were embedded in his muscle memory. But Marcus felt his body begin to respond to the music in ways that went beyond what he had planned. He started to move across the stage with more energy, adding spins and slides that he had practiced in his apartment, channeling the kinetic power he had seen James Brown unleash countless times. He dropped to one knee during a guitar solo, throwing his head back like he was possessed by the spirit of the music itself, and when he rose, he added a quick spin that brought cheers from sections of the crowd. The band responded to his energy, playing harder, pushing the groove deeper, and Marcus felt himself surrendering to the performance, letting instinct take over. He didn't consciously decide to imitate James Brown. It happened organically, almost inevitably, as if his body couldn't help but reach for the vocabulary of movement that had been etched into his soul through years of devoted study. Marcus added the quick footwork, the sudden stops and starts, the way of pointing to the crowd and bringing them into the moment. He slid across the stage during a breakdown, his boots polished enough to catch the lights, and the crowd roared their approval. For those few minutes, Marcus wasn't thinking about anything except the music and the motion, the way rhythm could transform a body into pure expression. He was floating, flying completely alive in a way that he had never experienced before. The song ended with a flourish, Marcus striking a final pose as the band hit the last note, and the applause that erupted was genuine and enthusiastic, no longer polite, but truly engaged. What Marcus didn't know, couldn't have known in that moment of triumph and release, was that James Brown himself had arrived at the venue early and was standing in the wings, stage right, watching this young musician with intense focus. The godfather of soul had seen 1,000 imitators, countless performers who tried to copy his moves, his style, his energy, but there was something about watching this kid, this earnest, talented kid from Atlanta, that caught his attention. James Brown stood perfectly still, his face unreadable behind his sunglasses, his legendary cape draped over one arm, watching as Marcus took his bow and the crowd continued to applaud. The members of the JBs who were nearby saw their boss watching and exchanged glances, wondering what he was thinking, what judgment he was forming about this young performer who had just channeled the very essence of James Brown's stage presence, intentionally or not. Marcus finished his set with one more song, pouring everything he had left into it, And when he finally walked off stage, sweat pouring down his face, his shirt soaked through, his hands shaking from the adrenaline, he felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. His band members clapped him on the back, grinning, telling him how amazing it had been, how the crowd had loved it, but Marcus could barely process their words. He had done it. He had actually done it. He set his guitar down carefully in its case, his hands still trembling, and reached for a towel to wipe his face. The stage manager appeared again, but this time his expression was different, harder to read. "Marcus Williams?" he asked, even though he clearly knew who Marcus was. Marcus nodded, still trying to catch his breath. "Mr. Brown would like to see you," the stage manager said, his voice carefully neutral. "In his dressing room now." The words hit Marcus like cold water. James Brown wanted to see him. The James Brown. His idol, his inspiration, the man whose every move he had just been imitating on stage. Marcus felt his stomach twist into knots as 100 thoughts raced through his mind simultaneously. Had he offended James Brown by copying his style? Was the legend angry that some unknown kid had tried to borrow his signature moves? Or was this something else entirely? Some opportunity that Marcus couldn't yet understand. He looked at his bandmates, who stared back at him with wide eyes, as shocked as he was, and then he nodded to the stage manager. "Lead the way," Marcus said, his voice coming out steadier than he felt, and he followed the man down the narrow backstage corridor toward whatever judgment or revelation awaited him in James Brown's presence, his heart pounding harder than it had even when he first stepped onto the stage. The corridor leading to James Brown's dressing room felt impossibly long, even though Marcus knew it couldn't have been more than 50 feet. Each step echoed in his ears, louder than it should have been, competing with the sound of his own racing heartbeat. The stage manager walked ahead of him without speaking, his posture businesslike and efficient, giving no hints about what awaited behind the door at the end of the hallway. Marcus wiped his palms on his pants for the third time, trying to steady himself, trying to prepare for whatever was about to happen. Through the walls he could hear the muffled roar of the crowd as the meters took the stage, their funk immediately getting people on their feet, but the sound felt distant, like it was happening in another world entirely. All of Marcus's focus had narrowed to this moment, this walk, this impending confrontation with the man who had shaped his entire understanding of what music could be. The stage manager stopped at a door marked with a gold star, and the words "Headliner Private," and knocked twice, sharp and professional. A voice from inside, commanding even in its brevity, said, "Come in," and the stage manager opened the door, gesturing for Marcus to enter. Marcus stepped through the doorway and found himself in a dressing room that was larger and more luxurious than he had expected, with mirrors lined with bright bulbs, a leather couch against one wall, and a rack of immaculate suits in various shades of shimmer and shine. But Marcus's eyes went immediately to the man sitting in the center chair, facing the mirror, his reflection meeting Marcus's gaze before he turned around. James Brown looked exactly as he did on television and in photographs, but somehow more real, more present, radiating an energy that filled the entire room. He wore a deep purple suit with razor-sharp creases, his hair perfectly processed, his face composed in an expression that gave away nothing. "Marcus Williams," James Brown said, his voice carrying that distinctive tone that Marcus had heard on countless recordings, and hearing his own name spoken by that voice made the moment feel surreal. "That's your name, right?" Marcus nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "Yes, sir, that's me," he managed to say, and was grateful that his voice didn't crack. James Brown studied him for a long moment, his gaze intense and evaluating, taking in everything from Marcus's sweat-soaked shirt to his nervous posture. Then slowly, the godfather of soul stood up, his movements controlled and deliberate, and walked toward Marcus until they were just a few feet apart. The room felt charged with tension, and Marcus had no idea whether he was about to be praised or criticized, whether this meeting would change his life for better or worse. "I watched your set," James Brown said, and Marcus felt his stomach clench. "Watched the whole thing from the wings." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, and Marcus forced himself to maintain eye contact, even though every instinct told him to look away. "You've got talent, son. Real talent. Your guitar playing is solid, your voice has character, and your band is tight. That's good. That matters." Marcus felt a flicker of hope, but James Brown wasn't finished. "But I also saw you doing my moves out there. The spins, the slides, the drops. You know those are my moves, right?" The question was direct but not harsh, delivered with the confidence of a man who had earned the right to ask it. Marcus swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir, I know. I've studied your performances since I was a kid. You're the reason I wanted to be a musician in the first place." James Brown's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been amusement crossing his face. "Studied me, huh? I could tell. You got the moves down pretty good. I'll give you that. Better than most people who try to copy me." He walked over to a small table where several bottles of water sat in a bucket of ice, grabbed one and tossed it to Marcus, who caught it reflexively. "Drink that. You look like you're about to pass out." Marcus opened the bottle and took a long drink, the cold water helping to clear his head slightly. James Brown picked up another bottle for himself, but didn't open it, instead holding it as he continued to speak. "Now here's the thing I want you to understand, Marcus. There's a difference between honoring someone and copying them. You follow what I'm saying?" Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. When you honor someone, you take what they've taught you, what they've shown you is possible, and you use it to find your own voice, your own style. You build on the foundation they laid down. James Brown gestured broadly, his movements as expressive as they were on stage. But when you copy someone, when you just try to be them instead of being yourself, you're not adding anything new to the music. You're not pushing it forward. You're just echoing what's already been done. He stepped closer to Marcus, his voice becoming more intense, but not unkind. "I didn't become James Brown by trying to be Little Richard or Jackie Wilson, even though I learned from both of them. I became James Brown by taking what they taught me and adding something that was completely mine, something nobody had seen before." The words hit Marcus with the force of revelation. He had spent so many years studying James Brown, trying to capture that same energy and power, that he hadn't fully considered what it meant to find his own identity as a performer. "You've got something special, Marcus," James Brown continued, his tone shifting to something almost paternal. "I could see it in the way you played, in the way you connected with that crowd. But you're never going to reach your full potential if you're trying to walk in footsteps that have already been laid down. You need to make your own footsteps, create your own path." He paused, making sure Marcus was absorbing every word. "The audience tonight, they liked what you did, but they liked it because it reminded them of me. The question you need to ask yourself is, what are you going to give them that makes them remember you as Marcus Williams, not as the guy who does James Brown impressions?" Marcus felt emotions welling up inside him, gratitude, embarrassment, inspiration, determination, all mixed together. "I understand, Mr. Brown," he said quietly. "I really do. I never meant to disrespect what you've built by copying you. I wanted to feel what it was like to move people the way you do." James Brown's expression softened, and he placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I know that, son. And that's why I wanted to talk to you, instead of just letting it slide. You've got too much potential to waste it being somebody's shadow." He walked back to his chair and sat down, his posture relaxing slightly. "Let me tell you something that somebody told me a long time ago, when I was about your age and trying to figure out who I was as an artist. They said, 'The world doesn't need another anybody. The world needs the first you.'" The simplicity and truth of those words resonated deep within Marcus. He had never thought about it quite that way before, had never considered that his devotion to imitating his idol might actually be holding him back from discovering his own artistic identity. "So, what do I do?" Marcus asked, his voice earnest and vulnerable. "How do I find that? How do I figure out who Marcus Williams is supposed to be?" James Brown smiled, and it was the first truly warm expression Marcus had seen from him since entering the room. "You already started tonight. You wrote your own songs, you brought your own band, you connected with that audience. That's your foundation. Now you just need to build on it without looking over your shoulder at what I'm doing or what anyone else is doing." He stood up again and walked to the rack of suits, running his hand along the fabrics thoughtfully. "I'll tell you what, I'm going to do something I don't usually do. After my set tonight, I want you to come back here. I'm going to introduce you to my band, let you talk to some of the musicians who've helped me create this sound. Not so you can copy what we do, but so you can understand the principles behind it, the discipline, the innovation, the willingness to take risks. Maybe that'll help you on your journey." Marcus felt his eyes widen in disbelief. "You'd do that for me?" James Brown turned to face him, his expression serious. "I'm doing it for the music, Marcus, for the future of this art form. Every generation needs artists who are willing to push boundaries, to try new things, to be brave enough to be themselves. I think you might be one of those artists, but only if you commit to finding your own voice. Marcus felt tears threatening to form, but fought them back, not wanting to seem weak in front of his idol. "Thank you, Mr. Brown, I won't forget this. I promise I'll work to find my own path." James Brown nodded approvingly. "Good, now get out of here. I've got to finish getting ready for my set, and you've got some thinking to do." Marcus turned to leave, but as he reached the door, James Brown called out one more time, "Marcus?" He turned back. "Yeah?" The godfather of soul was standing in front of his mirror now, adjusting his collar with the precision of a man who understood that every detail mattered. "That opening you did tonight? That was good. Real good. Don't let anyone tell you different. You just make sure the next time I see you perform I'm watching Marcus Williams, not a tribute act. You got me?" Marcus grinned, feeling a confidence building inside him that was different from what he had felt before going on stage. Not the borrowed confidence of imitating greatness, but the emerging confidence of someone beginning to believe in their own potential. "I got you, Mr. Brown, I definitely got you." He walked out of the dressing room and back into the corridor, where the sounds of the venue seemed sharper, more vibrant, as if he was hearing everything with new ears. His bandmates were waiting for him near the equipment cases, their faces full of questions, but Marcus just shook his head and smiled. "I'll tell you later," he said. "Right now, I want to watch the master work." They made their way back to the wings, finding spots where they could see the stage without being in the way of the crew. The meters finished their set to thunderous applause, and then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The house lights went down. A single spotlight hit center stage, and James Brown emerged to a roar that shook the entire building. For the next 90 minutes, Marcus watched in awe as the godfather of soul commanded that stage with absolute authority. Every move calculated, every note perfect, every interaction with the audience a masterclass in performance. But this time, Marcus wasn't just watching to memorize and imitate. He was watching to understand the principles beneath the performance, the confidence, the originality, the absolute commitment to being authentically himself. When the show ended and the crowd filed out into the Atlanta night, still buzzing with the energy of what they had witnessed, Marcus returned to James Brown's dressing room as invited. True to his word, the legend introduced Marcus to members of the JBs, who shared stories about their creative process, about the risks they took to develop their sound, about the importance of discipline and innovation working together. Marcus listened to every word, asked thoughtful questions, and began to formulate ideas about how he might apply these principles to his own musical journey. As the night wound down and Marcus finally left the Civic Center, his guitar case in hand, he felt fundamentally changed. The young man who had walked into the venue that evening had been trying to be someone else. The young man who walked out was ready to discover who he truly was. Years later, when Marcus Williams had found his own success, had developed his own signature sound that blended funk, rock, and soul in ways that were uniquely his, he would tell the story of that night in Atlanta to anyone who would listen. He would describe the moment when his idol taught him the most important lesson of his career, not through criticism or rejection, but through honest wisdom delivered with respect and hope. The encounter became legendary in music circles, a story about mentorship, about artistic integrity, about the responsibility that great artists have to encourage the next generation not to imitate greatness, but to create their own. And whenever Marcus performed, whenever he moved across a stage with his own distinctive style, he carried with him the words James Brown had spoken. The world doesn't need another anybody. The world needs the first you. That truth, given freely on a summer night in 1973, became the foundation of everything Marcus built, the legend that shaped his life and the lives of countless others who heard the story and found the courage to be themselves.